Foolish boys. Mudlum. Because of life. The summer it all came to an end in Ada's garden. Sulislav managed to live in 3 different places. He was in one for a month and a half, one for a month, and one for only a bit. At some point, and this was now some years ago, he had tried to count the number of places he'd lived on his fingers. He came to 28 or so, but I definitely didn't remember them all, he said. He'd lived in basements and as high as the 16th floor, in communal rooms and countless collapsing houses rented out before their final demolition. Of them, at least 3 have now been wiped from the earth. That beautiful secretive house where they had the studio and the HQ is now gone. The place with a window at the edge of the low ceiling and the stunning view of the roads is now gone. The house is still there, but it was eventually sold, and some bourgeois live there now. Someone has repainted the walls the color of chicks and tilled the garden, where they grow radishes. If only they knew. Sulislav had shaved off his long mane. He was not completely bald, but his hair no longer hung down over his brow, and he went about with a very proper men's haircut. He'd bought himself a new plum purple suit. For whatever reason, he did tend to talk about clothes a lot, and in that sense, happily, nothing much had changed. An indispensable part of his daily ritual remained his visits. In the evenings he took the bus to go see someone, and spent between 20 and 40 minutes there, depending on his mood, but never for longer. Out of old habit, he tended to make himself something to eat while he was there. If his host had an empty pantry, Sulislav tottered off to the store and bought, with his own money, all kinds of things, came back and made a good pot full of food. The coffee mug shoved under his nose always stayed half empty, because he took a few gulps and then forgot about it as he prattled. "Coffee, coffee," he shouted, rubbing his hands together as he stepped in the door. But the coffee stayed undrunk. "I found a place you can buy normal pants," he announced suddenly. After receiving a surprised stare in response, Javisha explained. "They don't make normal clothes. Everything is either for people who are too short, too fat, too skinny, or too weird. I want some very specific things, like a purple sweater. Where can I get a purple sweater? They are always either blue, bottle green, or black, or synthetic." For his whole life he'd worn the exact same things. Slacks that had lost their creases but had the pockets turned inside out at the hips, light button-up shirts, and then a vest or a V-neck sweater on top. Now it seemed he was looking for a change. In addition to his increased interest in his wardrobe, he started practicing self-control and spiritual discipline. Once he showed up in sweatpants like Pan Trump. "What are you now, an athlete?" "Yeah," he answered. "I started running. You can't imagine how nice these are. Mega comfy. Definitely buy yourself a pair. You don't even feel like you're wearing anything. They're so light and warm." He'd also quit smoking. His circle of friends thus split in 2. The ones whom he could visit at home because they didn't smoke there. "Otherwise it's nasty. I can't be inside that stench." And the ones he could only see in the fresh air, because none of them were so radical as he, and they all continued to huff like chimneys as before. "Doctor's orders," he said. I really felt like I was gonna die. I couldn't breathe. My heart was straining. I smoked like 5 packs a day in Bemovo. Later, it would turn out that he'd also stopped drinking. But we know by Adam's example that this is achievable for people of only the strongest character. Because after that, nothing is as it was before. At the beginning, Javisha still tried to act like a normal person. He went to parties, birthdays, New Year's, and etc. But after the first half hour, everyone seemed so stupid that it became too depressing to be there. Jesus, they are fucked up that he might confess to Ada or Sophia or to some other motherly lady. Gossip was almost the only bit of fun left to him. And eating. He had the money to eat out now. He worked on an animated film for most of the day, but in the evenings he treated himself and sometimes others to a meal at some hip restaurant. And he didn't hesitate to go to places all the way on the other end of town, which allowed him to ride the bus again. Animated films, he announced to his friends, is the only art form of the future. Books are for museums. No one reads books anymore. They're not a modern topic of conversation. You can do the exact same things with a cartoon. You have a story and you tell that story. You are totally free to create any kind of world you want, and you're not limited by some actor's stupid ugly mug, and they don't come along and mangle your idea with their performances. I'm thinking it out, and Arkadiusz is gonna draw it. I'd be willing to bet that all movies will be animated soon. It's limitless freedom. And note that animated films aren't nailed down to just Poland. There are international festivals. Everybody understands your vision. And you can write as much text along with it as for a book. I can finally create my own world in peace. Suliswav worked like a draft horse for 2 years, and in the third, things seemed to be coming together. And this was not just any project. They were making a full-length film. He had also tried, of course, to draft Jerzy for the project. Who else but Jerzy could bowl the world over with his drawings? And miracle of miracles, Jerzy came. He supported a project existing outside his own personal parallel reality for an entire month. He never gave explanations for the sketches he made for Suliswav's fantasies, a mix of airships, like the one in that Russian fairy tale, and the flashiest space machines with every rivet, every connecting rod, every flask exactly in place. So there was no doubt that these machines worked. They were so thorough that a savvier man might have taken the drawings as blueprints and built them. And then one day he stopped coming, and when Suliswav went knocking on his door trying to convince him, it was no use. Jerzy didn't want to. He locked the door to his mother's house and disappeared into the attic. Wanda had finally finished at the high school she hated, and she had a plan she kept secret at first. She did tell one acquaintance, however, sure that this friend had tight lips. These lips turned out to be looser than expected, and the story got afoot, which made Wanda extremely angry. She berated the blabbermouth over it thoroughly. That said, the plan was nothing to be ashamed of. She had decided to go study in Berlin. Where is the coolest art scene? Berlin, of course. But she wanted to keep things quiet until she was sure she had gotten in. She got in at the first try, and into not one, but 2 different art schools. She had applied to more than one, and to some in different cities just in case. But now she needed to decide where to go. She could choose, and all roads were open to her. So, Berlin, and Wanda disappeared over the horizon. So one of the last things her friends remember of her was a flopped party where everybody still hollered pointlessly about Blanche and got very sad. Wanda turned entirely within herself and sat like a hammer on its head, wobbling back and forth, but not falling. No one knew she was suffering from depression and that life seemed abhorrent to her. This was the winter that followed the summer when everything collapsed. But people got their spirits back in the spring, and Wanda got her self-confidence back because everything went so well. In reality, the truly final meeting was at the end of July before Wanda left. It was an outdoor party and a farewell party, so everyone had showered and put on decent clothes for the occasion. They took pictures, together, alone, with friends, and it was warm, and they sat in the city for a long time after the sun went down. When you come back, Poland will be a better place. We'll make it nice for you, the boys promised. At first, Wanda came home frequently and always let everyone know when she would. People always came to pick her up when she arrived, wanted to bring her to theirs to visit, out for coffee, and as soon as she'd gone again, they started to bombard her with letters asking when she'd come back. But 3 years later, the number who bothered to find out when she would return had dwindled to only a few. By the 4th year, she decided not to tell anyone when she would be in Warsaw, and nobody was interested in how things were going in Berlin, what her final project would be, or how she was at all. They were all now over 30, except for little Julia, who was just over 20 but still looked 16. Julia Mosakowska was married and had a child. As always, she went about her work quietly and without any fuss, so when she'd been a driving force behind this or that, people only ever found out by coincidence. She translated the text Suliswav had written for his animated film into German. It was as long as a full-length novel. She did constant, invisible, amazing work. People gave her their unedited manuscripts, translators their translations to look over, and philosophers stole her ideas because she still liked to drink, and when she did, she was sometimes very outspoken. Pan Trump organized on underground parties. This was indeed a surprising development, because it had once been very hard to convince him to come out anywhere. No, he had preferred to while away the hours alone at home, a glass at his hand and the record player spinning. He had now discovered an unbelievably party animal, a melomaniac inside himself, and every week he DJ'd at some dump somewhere, wearing multicolored sweatpants, with his bangs gelled rakishly up. Arkadiusz worked as he always had. He still hasn't had his exhibition, but is, as before, the kindest, most modest, and most balanced person. He has started to bald slightly, and still dresses very elegantly. He did finally let a genuine tailor repair his coat, and he even sits at the sewing machine from time to time. If you want to look chic, you have to work at it, as with everything else. Nothing just happens. He always has his sketch pad. His pencils are always sharp. He does work with work. Who knows where he might end up with all this working. He's vain too, dear Arkadiusz. Every time he goes abroad to see exhibitions, and he is going constantly, he has people take photos of him in front of this or that work of art. It's a hobby. taking photos of yourself with immortality. Sometimes there is a golden throne room where naked nymphs wallow sultrily in wall panels, and sometimes it is a barren white room with an anchor rode in a pile in the corner. And for whatever reason, it seems that his eyes are a little bit sad behind his wire-rimmed glasses. But it only seems so, right? But Abram, how is he faring? Well, very well. He still ran indiscriminately amok for some years, ranting and raving far and wide. He hewed, he cried, bantered, threw gauntlets, despised, loved, hated and cursed, all fully and passionately. And then suddenly he disappeared. Silence. Not a rustle of leaves on a tree. Nothing interesting happening. There is no one to slander. See that Judas, that con man, that dolled up dumbass. Poland is boring without him. It's said he finally succeeded in sailing to a place in America. He lives a quiet, meek life there and picks fights with no one. Everyone is gracious to him in America. They smile, and their white teeth shine in the sunlight, and he is gracious to everyone in return. It is nice to live in a world where everything is private property. Adam is now generally seen walking barefoot around Warsaw. His hair is down to his mid-back, and he has a beard like a Russian Orthodox priest, long and untrimmed. He is very skinny and hunched with sharp facial features and wears a penitent's robe. He got into a fight with Sulislav, who of course tried to put Adam to work on the animation. It's good to do things with your own team, the people who know what you're thinking better than you do. And for the second time in his life, the first was his inglorious job selling Christmas trees, Adam had a real job. But he shot the team's morale because he didn't make it to work until the sun was starting to set. When a person lives on a reverse time cycle, 9 to 6 is completely out of his rhythm. He would then frequently wander the workrooms alone at night, and he did actually do work, but he was maddeningly, almost torturously slow. The results were out of this world, and everybody loved them. But the reality was that just as Sulislav lacked any inspiration to pursue Blasche, Adam didn't give a damn about the cartoon, whose principal idea was something the three of them had thought up more than 10 years ago. This is to say that Adam was a monomaniac. If he had one thing that wound him up, he could holler tirelessly about it, work at it, be an example, and inspire others. But try for a moment to hold his attention with something whose value he deemed suspect. He would devote but 0.1% of his brain to it. He sauntered around in everybody's way, looked haggard, picked fights, and lounged on the couch, and when everyone had had enough of his useless lolling, they also recognized that they were not going to find a mind like his anywhere else, so they tried to get him to draw as well. Because who used to draw such beautiful test tubes, sad girls, and long-coated revolutionaries? But when they asked him to do, say, a simple thing like a bush for the cartoon, they got some kind of bodge job in return. Adam could bring himself to do things only in his own way. In his cartoon, there wouldn't have been flying airships, but lots of tiny old men. Eventually, he did as he does. He simply disappeared. He didn't show up at work for a month. They searched for him everywhere. But he'd found a girl, of course, and shoved off somewhere in the boonies with her. They just had to let him go. He and Sulislav didn't get into a fight over his truancy. Everybody knew what Adam was like. he'd have been completely forgiven for that. But he had no need of forgiveness. Instead, he bore a secret rage in his heart for a long time until it finally broke out of him. When a time-honored friendship turns to quarreling, one might not know the reason, but still can suspect it. Cherchez la femme. Let your theories be as they may, but I want your practice. If, in practice, you still pull knives over a girl, then your heart is not quite yet free of the bourgeois craving for ownership. Or who knows what it actually was. In any case, whenever Adam got his rage sword out and gazed around wrathfully at everyone, Theophil used to say, "Oh look, Makievich gone Georgian." In Jakub's dubious lineage flowed, evidently, some fiery Georgian blood. Adam's flock had scattered. He celebrated his 30th birthday with an entirely new band. His new disciples were partly still school-aged, bright-eyed and brainless. They disappeared soon, too. Finally, he was left with only one apostle, a curly-haired young man who called himself an intellectual. Yes, called himself so. "I am an intellectual," he had a habit of saying. "I am the writer of unwritten books." His talk was confused, repetitive, and full of complicated words. He had grand plans, and yet absolutely no ability to organize himself, but he had been to university, and so in that sense, he considered himself a successful and respectable individual. Eventually he landed in the corner of Adam's room with all his wisdom and stayed, annoying everyone who might otherwise have happily paid Adam a visit. Former members were still visiting Makievich many years after Blodge's death. They were dispirited and crestfallen, and complained about missing the editorial board and how good everything used to be, and how it all went to shit nevertheless. One of them even cried, and with good reason. For some, this was the essence of their lives, all that they had, and their whole identity, reputation, ambition and potential was realized only and exclusively through Blodge. They tried to devise a plan. Could we not somehow revive it, or do something new but comparable? Someone even said that it was Koldovsky's fault. Is it not? He just came and cocked it all up. Try and tell me I'm wrong. Try and tell me it was your fault. You might be right, and maybe it was my fault, Adam answered. But have you ever heard of a thing called the Pustelnicy? Not so long ago they were a group of companions here in Poland who called themselves that. Their credo was that they never talked about themselves and kept things in the shadows. They were seriously important guys. Never heard of them. What did you say? Pustelniks? They couldn't have been that well known with that kind of attitude. Well, we are also kind of Pustelniks. You can't say we failed or that we left no imprint. We were simply invisible, like air. And it was pretty nice air to breathe, anyway. But Sulislav says that Blodge still exists, that it is in his cartoon. I mean, it exists a bit everywhere. Nothing truly disappears. A little bit there, and a little bit in Juto, and a little bit in the people who believed in it. You only build a better world out of failures, even if it seems things have gotten worse in the meantime. I believe so. It helps you live. Thank you, Adam. The girl dried her eyes and went home in a much better mood. The end.